more approachable. Here to serve, really, customer service and That's just funny. Yeah, that's really funny. He's a character. That's some second lines. Very impressive. We're live. It's not boring. What's he doing now? Nothing really. Not like taking his kids around to tennis tournaments and sold the insurance agency. So I think you're right. Now that I think about her brother or
saying that she sold her part of it?
I think so. As we learned last week, it turns out insurance is quite profitable. Never do that. They're profitable forever. Yeah. It's a fair one you're going for. What's going on, bro? A little hard the last 6 weeks because all the heat, you know. It was certainly more humid summer. It's always humid, but this was about a lot. Never really temperature-wise. Not real deal. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's cooler actually, but the heat is tough. Oh yeah. I can eat ice cream and drink beer every night. And not gain a pound, you know. It sticks a little bit more, but yeah. $120. Okay, that sounds good. Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Yeah.
We're going 5 minutes.
But I'll program and make it Sergeant Armstrong. He's not here. So,
that might be.
I got it. Actually, I'm going to say I have a whole team set up, but since they're starting players, this never happened before. Do that track. This is all. That's the line now.
right, yeah.
That's what they all say. That's what they all say.
It never happened.
Always say it's going to be better. It's going to be much better.
Oh, yeah.
Different. What's up, guys? I'm so sorry you won't be able to enjoy my.
So is the link working?
Yeah, here it is right here on YouTube.
Where's your lawyer at?
What are you clicking on?
The link in the stuff.
Yeah, that's what I clicked.
I came by your house today and there's a movie right now. Moving my house.
Oh, okay, yeah.
For sale seat over there?
Yeah, please do. It's not they're not a need. It's okay. The folks who were going to stream are no longer with me, so for parents who are going to watch by streaming, but they just changed their mind. So we don't need to. I don't need to get a link to work.
Okay, well,
It's working though. Yeah.
click the button.
We don't know that. But I click the link in the scuttle button, it doesn't open. Nice to meet you. Just something to.
I clicked it and worked
I mean, I just,
I'll be scouting.
you know, I just hit.
I'll be scouting for you when I'm down there. Next month. I'll be looking for you next month when I'm down there. Thank you, Bob. That's how it's gonna work. You see how it's gonna work? You get the clearance.
Yeah. No, the link wouldn't work.
Bad neighborhood for Matt. Yeah. Just over 2 years. Yeah. I'm being inducted today. Yeah. So, joining the Rotary Club. Yeah, I'm across town. So there you go. I mean, it really does have I'm the director.
It sounds like there's something to that effect. He was on whatever his version of Twitter is. He was on there this morning saying, well, Obama did it. And when you're, which I don't think is true, but when you're defensive of the
How close to
To what now? Old school, not too far. But we're just like probably four miles further
so
south.
to me, you know, that's pretty close to admitting that
We know
he
old
did it
school,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
trying to deflect it so he really did it too.
my friend's parents' name was Mark Warren.
Yeah. I don't know them. I don't know them, but I know that street pretty well. I'm a friend who lives over there.
They told me about this 7 years ago. They had 55 acres of land there.
You're right, Rich. You are. I just like it out there. Everything's more spread out. There's a lot of woods, and I don't. My kids are all.
Speaking of life's enrichment, how are you?
Even Shirley's got a college.
She is. Shirley's.
Thank God she was about done for the
I know. I know. But she's going to turn 24 in September. My youngest, Shirley. Yeah. I am. We just had dinner with her last week. Telling us all the other.
I remember her running around.
Exactly. Yeah. It's trying to shove a whole bunch of cookies in her pocket.
And my son is Memphis now. He's 13.
That's it. Yeah, that's something. Yeah, it's just
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Pam, how's my
Has it been harder to do everything in this space?
I had a 3x5. Damn right, Dad. come off the motorcycle.
I was here.
Hey, Ron, you want to start in a few minutes?
Sure. So you want me to wait till everybody kind of gets their food?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think we need to rush.
Okay.
I mean, dude, we're still 5 to 1. Just stand up. Just have you stand up. You're inducted. Great. Welcome. Ba ba ba.
We got to do the sign of the cross.
Some guys started kind of hard tonight. You on the first two, the guys
It's funny, whenever he has one of his charities, he donates to us. We're all just swapping dollars here, so at least we're giving dollars. Okay, are you a member, man?
Yeah, he invited me. He's been inviting me for about a month. I was finally able to come last week.
The first meeting I came to was the pros. Okay. Yeah.
and racist.
Color on the golf range. Got a great speaker today. You should try it out. Right. Yeah. And it doesn't stop because it's in. Here we go. Can you come? Can you come? Come to the meeting. Come to the meeting.
lived in like 4 different apartments now. Brooklyn, Manhattan, back and forth. But she got a job, she got benefits. Off the bill.
Don't want to get way early to get up.
It's like he's running for president again.
Where's the bell, man?
The bell is
Great job, huh?
Who is the president?
We were leaderless for you. I mean, oh, hi.
All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 7,682nd meeting of the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club. Welcome. I'd ring the bell, but there is no bell. How are you enjoying your lunch? If you need, the grills are on outside. If you continue to need to cook your burgers, you may want to check those burgers. I noticed some of them are a little pink on the inside, as in uncooked. So be careful. Although I guess steak tartare is something good. Apparently, Omar did an excellent job this week of sending email after email after email. He texted me 2 or 3 times to make sure we were here to get going by 12:40. He just forgot to tell the people who were coming. Other than that, he's doing a great job. He's ashamed. That's why he's not here today. And he's trying to stick this on Pat. I just want y'all to know that it was never this bad under Pat. It is reminiscent, though. All right. Mike Clayton, can you give the blessing for today's lunch?
Let's pray. Oh, great Heavenly Father, we thank you again for allowing us to come to this wonderful thing we call East Chapel Hill Rotary, where we get to celebrate fellowship above self and hang and have lunch and communicate and talk to people of like minds and do good things in the neighborhood. We appreciate the great weather you've given us today. I would have liked to play a little better on the back last week, but we'll talk about that another day. Thank you, Lord, for this food. Bless us to our body and the rest of your service. In your name we pray.
Thank you, Mike. Does somebody have the guest list today? Because in addition to not having a bell or a fine basket or any of the things that I'm supposed to have to be the sergeant of arms, could you please give me the guest list? Thank you so much. Now, I got some good news and I got some bad news for everybody. I have worked and prepared for a well-rehearsed and polished Sergeant of Arms presentation. That's the good news. The bad news is I turned 60 on Tuesday and I forgot it. So I guess that is a privilege of being 60, right? Let's see, we've got a couple of guests here today. It looks like Tim wrote this with a crayon. Guest name, guest
never had that problem when I was a
So we have a guest who is the guest of Scribble that looks like Chris Senior. Is Chris Senior?
Chris Senior.
Yes, Chris, can you introduce your guest, please?
I'm Chris Senior, and my guest is Christian Poole. He's from Western North Carolina, the Carolina graduate from back home.
All right.
Welcome, Christian. So,
Aronson, I have my brother Mark and my sister-in-law Judy Aronson, my guest from New Jersey on the way across country. I just want to say quickly, Judy's father, I learned on the way here, was a Rotarian in the Tenafly chapter, and she is a guest lecturer principally in the Englewood, New Jersey chapter.
fantastic. It's always nice to have qualified Rotarian members here. It's so rare. None of us are. Mr. Hebner. Yes, you have a guest.
Yeah.
My guest today is Aaron Meadows, who's coming back again. Aaron, would you stand up and wave at everybody so they'll know you?
Welcome, Aaron.
in spite of the fact that he's the president of our new homeowners association. So it won't last long.
It's good to have you here. I noticed, Tim, will you please, Jim did not write down his guests, so make sure you put this on so you can get billed appropriately. Actually, Aaron, you can put that on Pat Phelan's tab. All right, any other guests here today? Omar.
Rob, yeah, I have a number of guests related to youth services. I'll be introducing them during the program.
You don't want to do it now?
Well, we're gonna.
You want to leave it as a kind of a teaser. Get everyone. Okay.
Suspense.
Lorenzo, thank you. Any other guests? All right, who's ready for football? Huh? All right, let's show of hands. Who's more excited about college football or who's more excited about NFL? Ready? Let's go. NFL, raise your hands. All right, college. All right. Who can tell me the first home football game for the Tar Heels? Who are we playing?
Florida Atlantic.
Florida Atlantic? I don't think that's right. Florida what? A&M. And who can tell me what their mascots are?
The Rattlers.
The Rattlers. There you go, Tom. Well done. I don't think we've actually established who the quarterback is going to be yet for the Tar Heels, but that's exciting stuff. I have been keeping an eye on Sam Howell. You remember Sam? He got drafted in the 5th round, which was a disappointment. He could have stayed here and made more money at UNC under that NIL deals they have now. So it's kind of an interesting time. I'm mad at the Panthers that they didn't draft Sam Howell. But it turns out Sam Howell is in a great space with the Commanders because he's behind Carson Wentz, who has been a little bit iffy. And from all reports, Sam's doing a great job up there. So maybe Sam will play sooner with the Commanders than he will with the Panthers. Can anybody here tell me 2 other players with the Commanders that were Tar Heels?
Holcomb.
Cole Holcomb.
Our buddy.
Right? The walk-on.
Best linebacker in the NFL.
And the wide receiver, anybody?
Dewami Brown.
Dewami Brown. Look at Mike Clayton, head of the class today. Yeah, that used to be formerly known as the Redskins, now known as Commanders.
Yeah.
All right, Fine Basket is going around. Do we know what the charity is today?
We're gonna buy a belt.
Oh, bell! Fantastic! Fantastic. I would suggest an air horn. All right, air horn might be better. And,
We're going to buy a cardboard cutout Omar. So.
Yeah. I mean, this is his 2nd meeting, or 3rd meeting, and he's already missing stuff.
That's 6 route.
Anybody?
Yes, last name Hunt, Omar Hunt.
Is Mark Hunt here? Mark? No? Okay. Yes, Cliff.
Ben Griffin came in 4th in the pro golf tournament last week.
In the window.
Yeah.
Right, Ben Griffin used to be a youngster here at the Chapel Hill Country Club. You used to watch him play out there and do the putting greens and all that, and he quit. He was working for the local mortgage group, Corporate Investors Mortgage Group, and a couple of us talked with Ben and said, let's get back out there. He found a sponsor, and darn if he isn't tearing it up. Shot a 59 down in Sea Island, set the course record, and he holed out from the fairway 127 yards to do the 59. He played with a guy who shot a 65 and he beat him by 6 strokes. Think about that. Mr. Scranton.
Hey, Ben's on the Inside
Inside Carolina podcast. Everyone, we have a big day today. We got 4 inductions. We got what we do best here now with the Rotary locally with all these young kids. Want to welcome everybody, and I hope you have a great time. Pat, it's so wonderful to see you up here, and it's really great. It's only going to be for 1 meeting.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. It's always good to have a past president dress up for the occasion. So thanks for doing that, Rob. We have a big agenda today. We'll get right to it. It's always exciting when we bring new members into the club. Let's bring up Matt, if you would come up, and then everybody who is sponsoring and the members or the respective members themselves, why don't you come up as well. Thanks, Pat. Sure.
Welcome, everyone. This is indeed an exciting day. Although Rob didn't get the message that there are 3 people being inducted today, not 4, 1 more coming soon. Fellow Rotarians, it's the duty of our Rotary Club to add new members from time to time, so that we may not only increase our usefulness and influence as a club, but also extend the spirit of Rotary throughout the community and indeed the world. Today, we welcome to our ranks and admit to membership Max Hilke, William Spanzi, and Terrence Grayboy. Rotary is an international organization of business and professional people with more than 46,000 clubs around the world in over 200 countries. Max, William, and Terrence, I wish to impress upon you that you've been admitted not only to the Rotary Club of East Chapel Hill, that's our official name, but to a worldwide association of over 1.4 million like-minded business and professional leaders. With the pin that you're about to receive, you're entitled to travel throughout the world, find a Rotary Club within easy distance, and warmly be welcomed by fellow Rotarians. Even though the language may be different and food unusual, the location far from home, Max, William, and Terrence, the honor and privilege of Rotary membership also carries with it duties and obligations. You will be expected to attend our club's meetings regularly, to enthusiastically perform your share of club service through our teacher supply store, youth services, monthly family house meal service. Remember Rotary's motto, service above self. Our goal in Rotary is to encourage and foster, first, the development of fellowship as an opportunity for service. Second, high ethical standards in business and professions. Third, dignifying each Rotarian with an opportunity to serve society. Fourth, the advancement of international understanding, goodwill, and peace through a world of people united in the idea of service and fellowship. Rotary challenges us with the 4-way test. You're not required to memorize this, but we say it now often enough that we should. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And finally, fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Do you each accept this commitment? Yes. I would then ask all members, as you're able, please rise. Ricky, there we go. Thank you all. Max Hilke, William Spanzi, and Terrence Brayboy. In the name of Rotary Club of East Chapel Hill, it is now my honor and privilege to formally admit you to membership in our club and ask your sponsors, Jim Hevner, Daniel Eller, Liz Hankey, who's not with us, and Linda Sanders, to affix our emblem to your lapel, if possible.
That's why I can't hit it back in.
I was going to say congratulations, but we're all around there, Joe. All right. I'm going to say congratulations. It's close enough. Ask each of our new members to introduce yourself briefly and then pass the microphone on to the next person.
Hello everyone, I'm Terrence Brayboy, and I'm originally from Robeson County, North Carolina. I grew up in the swamps with the snakes, and I came to Chapel Hill in 1982 for the first time as a very young 17-year-old freshman. I went to undergraduate here, did medical school here, practiced emergency medicine for 26 years, and then retired a couple of years ago. And so now I'm doing nonprofit work in Africa. I started a nonprofit called Amina's Gift. Wow. So I'm back and forth about every 6 weeks. So if you don't see me here, I'm usually across the water, but I'll be back. It's an honor to join Rotary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm William Spranzi. You might have heard that last name before. My uncle, Robert Spranzi, is a member of the club. Just make sure that's clear, I'm not his brother. Despite our family being from here, I actually grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Spent some time in Washington, D.C., where I met my lovely wife. We moved here in 2008 so I could go to King and Flagler. Lived here ever since and still active in the community. I'm on the board for Table, if you've ever heard that, feeding kids in Chapel Hill Carrboro. I'm an adjunct professor for the business school as well as on the advisory board for the real estate center. I have a wife and 2 daughters, ages 11 and 8, and we're very glad to be here, and thank you very much for having me as a member.
Thanks.
My name is Max Hilke. I don't have quite as impressive resume as these 2 guys, but I'm about as local as they come. I have a nice smile because of John Frick. This is John Frick, member here. He did my braces. Toby Savage used to be in the double sports with my dad, and used to play baseball with Steve Fromey's kids. So I know a lot of you already, and thank you for the opportunity. For Jim and Cliff telling me how great this was. I don't know if I'd be here, and I also have 2 kids, 4 and 2, and I felt this is a great chance to kind of give back to Chapel Hill community. I really do believe in that, phrase, was it act locally to think globally, something like that. So I look at this as a great chance to give back to a community that's given so much to me and to set a good example for my 4 and 2-year-old boys. And my wife's name is Maddie, and so happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
Welcome them. Yeah. All right. Welcome to all the new members, and thank you, Matt, for conducting that. Real fast, we'll go down to the next part of the meeting. Our youth services program is a very important part of Rotary. Our friend Lorenzo's been in charge of this for a long time. He does a great job. Lorenzo Mejia, everybody. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. We have programs with RILA and also Summer Exchange, but I'd like to invite Julianne Reynolds to join me here. And as soon as we get her PowerPoint up, she'll give us a brief presentation. Why don't you stand over here, please? And I will give you this microphone.
Thank you.
And while we're waiting for that, just tell us, what did you like about RILA?
Yes, okay, hello everybody. My name is Julianne Reynolds, and I was one of your selected delegates to attend RILA, otherwise known as the Rotary Youth Leadership Awards Conference. And this is a 3-day intensive leadership experience where we get to build our leadership skills while having a blast, and we do that through a lot of lessons from inspirational speakers and peer mentors, and we have team building activities and workshops. And I went with one other person. Her name is Ashlyn Fortney. She was another delegate from this club, but unfortunately she couldn't be with us today, so I will be reading her account as well. So I'll start with what she has to say. She says, "Hello all, I apologize for not being able to physically be at the meeting today. My field hockey team is playing in a tournament, so wish us luck. RILA was truly an amazing and unforgettable experience. One thing I really loved was the weather and nature at camp. It was so calming to be away from my busy life for a weekend. The nature surrounding the campgrounds was very beautiful. My favorite part of RILA was the bonfire. At the beginning, every group got to present their flag and a short skit. Although these were super silly, it was a great way to show our team spirit. Afterwards, we ate s'mores, drank hot cocoa, and chatted with our friends about our day. My favorite activity was the wall. For this challenge, our group had to somehow get all 15 members up on the top of a 10-foot wall. It required a lot of teamwork and courage. It was truly a memorable experience, and I learned a lot about how to work with others. Many of the skills I learned during this weekend will stay with me throughout my life as a leader. I'm looking forward to coming back as a peer counselor next year." One more. Here we go. All right, so now that you've heard from Ashlyn, I want to talk a little bit about my experience at RILA. And when I look back on the experience, I think I really took 3 things away. And the first thing is I took back a giant support system and feeling of community. And if you look here on the left and upper right, these pictures truly give you a sense of that community. This is the group that I traveled around camp with and that I did a lot of my team bonding with. And I can say by the end of this 3 days, they truly felt like family. We still have a group chat, we still have plans to meet up in the future, and I was just surrounded with an extremely positive atmosphere. And with RILA, everybody is there to grow as a leader, to better their community, and to receive feedback from those around you. And when everybody is there to grow, it truly is this atmosphere filled with positivity. The second thing that I took away from RILA was the fun. If you see down here in the lower right, this is, here I am and there's Ashlyn, and we're playing cards in the cafeteria. They let us have free time, so it's like this perfect balance between growth and learning, but also free time and just getting to have fun at camp. And here we are playing cards at 2 a.m. They would leave free time open from like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. and we would just be having the best time of our lives in the cafeteria, laughing, playing cards, and playing volleyball. And so that was just a blast. This was my favorite activity. It was an annual challenge they do with the entire camp. They'd have everybody line up on those black X's around a rope red circle. And you couldn't step foot in the circle except on these wooden crates. And there were about 12 wooden crates, all 12 by 12. And we had over 200 kids at the camp. So we had to somehow get everybody on those crates. And in the end, we actually failed the challenge. But looking back at pictures, you see this is what happened. We tried to grab onto everybody while we were all on the crates. And we ended up toppling over. But if you look back at pictures, everybody's smiling and laughing after we fell over. And it was one of those eye-opening experiences where you realize that failure is truly a positive thing, and it's a part of that growth where you realize this didn't work, so let's try something else. And the last thing I took away from RILA were the lessons that I learned. So we wrote letters to ourselves at the end of the week, and I recently received mine earlier this summer, and I wanted to read a little snippet of my letter to you guys. It says, "When we get home, I want us to apply 4 things to our leadership and our daily life. Trust others, step out of your comfort zone, meet others where they are, and embrace experiences." And I truly have seen these traits be present and amplified in my life after RILA. I found myself trying to embody traits that I normally wouldn't have in order to grow. I found myself stepping up where I would normally step down. Leadership strategies that I learned in RILA, because I learned that you can't lead in one way when everybody learns in a different way. You have to project yourself in a way that's going to benefit all of the group. And finally, I've seen myself embracing experiences. I realize now that I'm stepping back and thinking, how is this helping me grow? What is the impact of this when I'm going through experiences now, all because of RILA? And that is all I have to say about RILA, but this truly was an amazing experience. Ashlyn and I both grew as leaders, as service to our community and as individuals, and we cannot thank you guys enough for giving us these lessons that will last with us for the rest of our lives.
Julian, thank you so much. I'd also like to invite now a woman you may remember from a few months ago, Evie Moncourt, and her friend, Ines Moreno Andreu, who is from Elche, Spain. So just to provide backdrop, Evie is a rising senior at East. Chapel Hill High. Okay, sorry about that. And she just went to Spain and stayed with Ines and traveled around, and now she's returning the favor here in the United States. So tell us a little bit about your trip and what you enjoyed most about being overseas in a different country.
Yeah, so thank you for having us. I came here in May and kind of just talked about how I was feeling going in. I think going into this trip, I was kind of just thinking, well, I know Spanish and I don't know that much about Spain and I don't really know Ines that well, but hopefully it'll work out. And I think I really had just an amazing time. I flew into Madrid, and so we spent some time there, saw museums, we walked around. There was also a heat wave going on, so it was very, very hot. But I think definitely it was an eye-opening experience. I got to see, of course, they have like everything there's like you eat later. We were eating lunch at 3 p.m. and then eating dinner at maybe like 10 or 11. So there were a lot of just like little cultural differences like that I think it was just cool to see and live in. And I think also my Spanish, that's something I really wanted to get out of this. I think it improved a lot. I think the first few days I was kind of struggling because there is a different accent in Spain, and also it's just very like fast paced. But I think through like, I was there for 3 weeks, like for basically from July 11th to the end of July. So I think over time, just spending a lot of time with her friends, spending a lot of time with her family, getting to meet all of her family, her grandmother, her cousins, her aunt, and her uncles. I think I was really able to just like embrace the different, they spend a lot of time with family, and I don't know, I just had a really great time. I don't really have that much else to say right now.
Inez, tell us a little about yourself, where you are in school, and what you hope to do in the future, and then what you've learned so far in the United States, what you hope to do in your little visit here.
Okay. Hello, my name is Inez, and I'm from Spain, from Elche. I'm studying bachillerato. It's like a high school, and the next year is my last course, so I'm interested in the law, yes. I don't know.
What have you done so far in Chapel Hill that you enjoyed? One thing in Chapel Hill that you have found interesting?
I love the nature.
Nature?
Nature, yes. Because in Elche is so.
It's very dry.
It's very dry, and here is so wet.
It's very green here.
Yes. So it's so beautiful for me, and yes.
That's great. That's great. So now I'd like to introduce the rest of the guests. Julianne's, well, I need my glasses. Sorry about that. Julianne's parents, Marcus and Kelly. Could I ask you guys to stand? And along with that, Stevie's parents, Mary. And it's an honor to touch the lives of extraordinary young people like your kids. I've said this before. I'll say it again. You can't do youth services without youth. And it is just a delight to meet and get to know people like your kids. Congratulations, and thank you for allowing them to participate in our programs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. So much. Youth is very important to this club because most of us have gray hair. So it's just great to see young people in a room. It's great to meet you. Thank you so much for everything. Let's move right along. We have Jim Hebner introduce our speaker.
Heather O'Reilly does not look quite like Heather O'Reilly today. Heather was scheduled to be our speaker today, and when I contacted her on Monday to make arrangements to get everything worked out, she advised me that she is in Ireland, where she has gone to play for a team that is competing to defend its national championship, as she's come out of retirement to do that. And I looked it up, and she did not have Omar's permission to do that. There will be consequences. Tom Jensen was scheduled to speak next week, and as you can see from the biographies and background that you have on the table, we are fortunate here in Chapel Hill to have a nationally recognized political analyst and pollster who will, although he, because we're in North Carolina, he works for Democratic candidates. No one in North Carolina does this for Republican candidates. He is our best person to call balls and strikes and tell us where we stand in the current political environment and what it all means. Please welcome our own Tom Jensen.
Well, thank you all for the opportunity to talk with you. What I have to say today is pretty different than what I would have had to say if I'd been here 3 months ago. Earlier this year, this was really shaping up to be a pretty typical midterm election. And what typically happens in a midterm election is that the party of the president gets blown out, especially if the president's unpopular. And President Biden certainly is unpopular. His approval ratings tend to be in the 30s, whereas President Trump's were usually at least in the low 40s. So President Biden's more unpopular than President Trump was. And when President Trump had higher approval ratings than this 4 years ago, Democrats took back the House by a pretty wide margin. So if we'd been talking a few months ago, I would have said, pretty firmly that we were headed towards a Republican landslide this fall. And just to quickly backtrack to why Biden's numbers are worse than Trump's, they have something in common, which is that neither of them won over anybody who didn't vote for them. So anytime you would poll on Trump's approval rating, 95% of people who voted for Hillary Clinton disapproved of Trump. Same thing for Biden. When we poll on Biden's approval rating, 95% of people who voted for Trump disapprove of Biden. Where the difference comes is with their own voters. Trump had very few people who voted for him change their mind about him. He'd usually have, among his own voters, about a 90% approval rating. Biden's approval rating among his own voters right now is more like 70%. And that's why Biden's numbers are lower overall, is because a lot more of his voters aren't happy with the job he's doing. And it's not necessarily that so many people who voted for Biden actually outright disapprove of the job he's doing, but a lot of them say that they aren't sure one way or the other. So on our average poll, out of everybody who voted for Biden, about 70% will say they approve, about 10% will say they disapprove, and about 20% will say they have no opinion one way or another. Whereas with Trump, there was nobody who didn't have an opinion about Trump. But that dynamic has pushed Biden's approval into the 30s, where Trump was always in 40s. So if we'd been talking 3 months ago, I definitely would have said Republicans are headed for a big landslide victory. They'll get control of the House, they'll get control of the Senate. When people were asking me, especially in the earlier part of this year, what do you think the Senate's going to look like after the election this fall, where of course it's 50-50 right now, I was pretty repeatedly and firmly saying I think Republicans will have a 54-46 majority in the Senate after this year's election, and certainly take control of the House by a pretty wide margin. But I'm a lot less confident about that now than I was a few months ago. A few things have happened that have sort of fundamentally changed at least the degree of the Republican wave that I think we're headed for. I still think we're headed for a good year for Republicans, but maybe not as emphatically a good year for Republicans as it would have been a few months ago. So the number one thing that has brought a change in the political atmosphere is the Supreme Court's decision on abortion. You basically had a situation earlier this year where Republicans were very fired up to go out and vote this fall, and Democrats didn't have very much motivation to go out and vote this fall at all. And the abortion decision got Democrats fired up to a point where we're now seeing that Democrats and Republicans are about equally fired up, whereas Republicans have had a big enthusiasm advantage earlier. And when we talk about this historic trend of the president's party getting blown out in the midterms, it's usually not because so many people changed sides from how they voted in the last election. If you voted Democratic in the last election, you're almost definitely voting Democratic in this election. If you voted Republican in the last election, you're almost definitely voting Republican in this election. But what happens a lot of the time in midterms is that one side is a lot more motivated than the other side. And traditionally, the party that's out of power is a lot more motivated to get out and vote, so they have big gains in the midterm election. What we're seeing since the abortion decision is that sort of leveled out. You all probably saw last week that Kansas had a vote on banning abortion last week, and Kansas, of course, is a super Republican state, voted for Donald Trump by 14 points in 2020, and when they had this question on the ballot about abortion, it failed 57-43. People cast a pro-choice vote. So this is something where, you see all these polls about how unpopular taking away abortion rights is, but people can sort of quibble with polls. But we had a poll with a sample size of 1 million people in a conservative state last week, and 57-43 they voted to keep the state's current laws allowing abortion. And what was particularly notable about that election in Kansas was it was the first time in something like 30 years that Democrats had turned out to vote at a higher rate in an election than Republicans did. So that really showed the extent to which this issue is galvanizing Democrats in a way that I think has further implications for this fall. So that's the biggest thing that's changed, is just this sort of comparative energy issue. The other thing that's really changed, though, is the key to Joe Biden's victory in 2020 was people who voted for Mitt Romney in 2012, generally highly educated voters, generally voters in suburban areas, who by 2020 were so appalled by Donald Trump that even though they had been Mitt Romney voters, even though they had traditionally been Republicans, they voted for Biden to try to get Trump out of there. It's not that these people necessarily became Democrats over the course of the Trump administration, and a lot of those folks may think that Democrats are too far to the left, but they just wanted to get Trump out of there. And one of the reasons that I would have been so confident earlier this year that this year would be such a huge year for Republicans is that last year there were 2 governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey, and both of those states voted 13 points more Republican than they had in the presidential race in 2020. So in Virginia, where Joe Biden won the state by 10 or 11, the Republicans won the governor's race by a couple points. In New Jersey, where Biden had won the state by 16, the Democrats only won the governor's race by 2 or 3 points. So you could see this huge shift happening. And one reason for that big shift in those 2 states, beyond the comparative motivation levels I was talking about earlier, was that those suburban voters who went Romney to Biden, once Trump was out of the picture, they said, okay, we're going to go back to voting Republican now. And those kinds of people voted Republican for governor last year in Virginia and New Jersey. That's a big part of why those states shifted so much. I think what the combination of the abortion decision by the Supreme Court and the ongoing investigation into what happened on January 6th is doing is making more and more of those kinds of voters, the Romney to Biden voters, well-educated, suburban, probably generally inclined to going back to voting Republican. I think the events of the last few months are making more and more of those people say, maybe we really are just going to have to keep voting Democratic. Maybe it wasn't just Trump that was a problem, and we're going to have to think about sort of more permanently altering our voting behavior, because it's becoming more and more clear that Trump wasn't an aberration. Like, Trump's Republican Party is the Republican Party now. Whether you like that or not, he has a pretty strong hold over the direction that it's taking, and I think that's pushing some of those people who are inclined to go back to voting Republican. It's making them rethink that a little bit more now. So in terms of what I would predict about this year's election now, I still think Republicans are going to take control of the U.S. House. And a big part of that is simply because the candidates don't matter that much for the U.S. House. It's sort of just like if the country's in a Republican mood, the Republicans will get the House. If the country's in a Democratic mood, Democrats will get the House, that sort of thing. I don't think Republicans are going to get as emphatic a margin in the House as they would have before these events of the last few months, but I do still think they're going to get a majority. But where I'm really sort of changing my mind about how I view the world is I increasingly think it's quite possible that Democrats are actually going to keep control of the Senate, maybe even add to their Senate majority, and that is very much because of candidate quality. Something that's happened across the country this year is there's basically 7 Senate seats that are definitely accepted as being competitive. Maybe you can get the list to 9 or 10, but the 4 seats that Republicans really need to win to try to get control of the U.S. Senate are Mark Kelly's seat in Arizona, Reverend Raphael Warnock's seat in Georgia, Catherine Cortez Masto's seat in Nevada, and Maggie Hassan's seat in New Hampshire. Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia all voted for Biden by around 1 point in 2020. So it doesn't take much of a shift in states that Biden won by 1 point for those to shift into the Republican column this year. But what's happened in the Senate races, and has also happened in some gubernatorial races across the country that's very consequential, is that in state after state, whoever Donald Trump endorses is winning the nomination for Senate in all of these states. And he's been endorsing a lot of people who have never held office before, or who, are particularly right-wing and that sort of thing. And because Republicans are ending up with a lot of weak candidates in these key Senate races, the incumbent Democratic senators are holding up a lot better than I thought they would. So for instance, in Georgia, Trump endorsed Herschel Walker. His campaign has kind of been a complete disaster. It's going to be an interesting measure of how far football stardom can take you 40 years ago, because he definitely has not transitioned very well to the political arena. So that's somewhere where a year ago I would have thought for sure the Republicans would be winning, but Warnock's up by 2 or 3 points. In Nevada, they endorsed Trump-supported candidate Adam Laxalt, who was the losing candidate for governor for Republicans in Nevada in 2018, so not a track record of winning. In Arizona, I can't really tell you that much about the background of who the Republicans endorsed, but he's younger than, who Trump endorsed and who the Republicans nominated, but he's younger than me, and he's never run for office before, and he's down by like 10 in the polls, when that's probably a state where Republicans should be winning. In Pennsylvania, where the Republican incumbent Pat Toomey retired, Trump got in and endorsed Dr. Oz. And he endorsed Dr. Oz at a time when we were finding that about 20% of voters in Pennsylvania had a favorable opinion of him. About 60% had an unfavorable opinion of him. So it was clear that this was going to cause big problems for Republicans in the general election if he got the nomination. Trump endorsed him. He won by 1 point with something like 31% of the vote in the primary. And the Democrat, John Fetterman's been up by about 10 points in the polls for most of the general election. So that's one that Democrats, in a year where I don't think Democrats should be gaining any Senate seats, that's somewhere where it looks like Democrats are almost definitely going to pick up a Senate seat. And Democrats also have chances at picking up Senate seats in Wisconsin and then in North Carolina. This is a situation in North Carolina where anytime one of our DC clients would call me up late last year, early this year, ask me, what do you think about your Senate race? I'd say, oh, I think Sherry Beasley's a really good candidate, but I think she'll lose by 6 to 8 points just because of the political climate. It's hard to overcome the political climate. And what it's actually turning out in North Carolina is that we basically have a tied race for the Senate. Some polls have Beasley up by a little bit, some have Ted Budd up by a little bit. And this is another one where Trump got involved in the primary and it made a big difference. We generally found that Pat McCrory did about 5 points better in polling against Sherry Beasley than Ted Budd did. But then Trump endorsed Ted Budd, and Ted Budd won the primary by 35 points, even though McCrory would have been a stronger candidate for the general election. So all of this is to say, if the election was today, which it's not, I think Democrats would actually end up with 51 or 52 Senate seats instead of the 46 that I thought they would end up with 6 months ago. So that's quite a shift in the landscape, and that's mostly based on Republicans nominating bad candidates in these key Senate races. But I'll just close that out, and I'm happy to take all of your questions. I'll close that out by saying, it's quite possible, for everything that I just said about how the picture is better for Democrats now than it was 6 months ago, that in the end, it's not going to matter that Republicans nominated any of these bad candidates. It may be that in the end, all the voters who are undecided right now, who mostly skew towards being unhappy with the Biden presidency, they may all end up voting Republican. In all of these races where Democrats are up right now, 48 to 45, 49 to 46, that sort of thing, the Republicans end up winning 51 to 49 because the voters just decide at the end of the day that they're unhappy with Biden, so they're going to vote Republican even if they think the Republicans put up a bad candidate. I'll tell you about a specific poll that sort of exemplifies that. A few weeks ago, we did a poll in Nevada, and the Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto was up 42 to 38. So 20% of voters either said they were voting for a third-party candidate or that they were undecided. And the other thing you can do in Nevada that's a little unusual is you can vote for none of the above. It's the only state where you can vote for none of the above. And none of the above has been getting more and more popular in recent years, as you might imagine. So we asked all the people who said they were undecided or third party or none of the above, well, if you really had to pick somebody right now, who would you vote for? And the Democrat went from being up 42 to 38 to being down 47 to 43. because almost everybody who was in that pool of 20% of people who initially said they weren't going to support one of the two major party candidates, when you made them choose, about 80% of them moved towards voting Republican. And that's something that we're seeing within a lot of our polling right now, that even though the numbers are better for Democrats than they were expected to be and better for Democrats than they should be right now, the voters who are sort of on the fence, saying that they're voting third party, that sort of thing, they all disapprove of Biden. So this is a situation, I feel sort of weird proactively doing this, but it's very possible that in some of these key Senate races, you're going to have a situation going into Election Day where the Democrat's up by 2 or 3, the Republican ends up winning by 2, people are going to say, oh, polling's so terrible, pollsters are so terrible, blah, blah, blah. I'm telling you today, on August 12th, that these Republicans might outperform their polls by 5 or 6 points, because we can see within the numbers that most of the voters on the fence are more inclined to vote Republican than Democratic. And if they actually do that, if what we're seeing within the numbers comes to fruition, it shouldn't be a huge surprise if that ends up happening. So even though things are better for Democrats now on the Senate front than they were, it wouldn't be a huge shock if at the end of the day it ends up being 54 to 46, just like we said 6 months ago, because it's just a situation where more and more the quality of the candidates just doesn't matter that much. People vote based on how they feel about the president. So that is my general overview of the lay of the land, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Yeah.
I'm curious, have you done any polling on legislative wins? You know, the Inflation Reduction Act is getting ready to pass the House today, and the Senate convected bill went through a couple weeks ago. And just, you know, how much does Congress actually getting stuff done that influence kind of the overall tenor and what you see in the numbers?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Could you repeat the question for the people on the audio, watching at home?
Sure. He said that there have been some legislative wins for the president lately, and what sort of impact might that have on the election? And you actually bring me to a point that I should have done in my sort of prepared comments, so I appreciate you bringing that up. One thing that's been really unusual over the last few months is that Biden's numbers have gotten worse, but numbers for Democrats in these key races have gotten better. And that's something that never happens. Things almost always move completely in line with the president's approval rating. And what you have this year is a fair number of voters who are unhappy with Biden from the left. Either from the left or from the just not doing enough standpoint. Those two things are slightly interchangeable, but not totally. So there's a lot of people who don't like Biden, but who would never even think about voting Republican, which is an unusual situation. You know, when people didn't like Trump, they were all voting Democratic, whereas there's a fair amount of people who aren't voting for Biden, but definitely are still going to vote Democratic. So something that we're already seeing some of, and I think we're going to see more of it, is I do think that these legislative wins are going to bring up Biden's approval numbers, but I don't know that they're necessarily going to improve Democrats' prospects for winning this fall, because the voters who Biden's approval numbers are going to go up with are these folks who are already voting Democratic who felt like he wasn't doing enough. So now when we poll them, they're going to say they approve of him, but that's not moving votes into the Democratic column because those people were already voting Democratic. They just didn't like Biden. So I think it's not going to have a huge impact on the election, but it'll make people more excited about Biden. Yeah.
As a Democrat, I am very excited that the Dr. Oz's of the world have won their primaries on the Senate side. But I am one of those Democrats that's very distressed about the Democratic Governors Association endorsing MAGA-related candidates because of gerrymandering. And so that scares me with more of non-traditional Republicans gaining ground in the House. So if you can talk about that, and you haven't talked about gerrymandering. And one other thing on the Nevada race, very exciting from the Democratic standpoint that the largest union in Nevada yesterday is now out stumping for the Democratic Senate candidate.
So 2 parts of that question that are very notable. She brought up the fact that the Democratic Governors Association has been interfering in Republican primaries to get the most extreme Republicans nominated. And the way that the DGA has been going about doing that is, I'll use Maryland as an example because we were actually pretty involved with this ourselves. Maryland has a popular Republican governor. He managed to get elected twice as governor in Maryland as a Republican, which is pretty impressive given that Democrats win the state by 30 points for president. And he had a chosen successor. He can't run again. He had a chosen successor he wanted to get in, but Trump doesn't like him. So Trump got his own candidate for governor. So the governor's race was basically this total proxy war between this person associated with Trump and this person associated with Larry Hogan. The Democratic Governors Association decided that if Larry Hogan's woman, her name was Kelly Schultz, got the nomination, Republicans might win a third term in a row as governor of Maryland. But that if Trump's candidate, Dan Cox, got in, Democrats would have a pretty easy time in the general election. So what the Democratic Governors Association did was they just spent all this money running ads about how Dan Cox was too extreme for Maryland and Trump loved him and blah, blah, blah. Well, that helped him in the Republican primary. So the Democratic Governors Association was attacking him, but the attacks were things that made Republicans more likely to vote for him. So he ended up winning the Republican nomination. Now that particular example, Joe Biden has only a +2 approval rating in Maryland, which is pretty bad given that he won the state by 30 points. With Biden having a +2 approval rating, Democrats are winning the governor's race in Maryland right now by 30 points because the Trump guy got in. Maryland's not going to vote for a Trump guy. So there have been a few examples of the Democratic Governors Association interfering like this, where it's clearly helped Democratic chances of winning this fall by getting the extremist Republicans in there. But I think the point you point to, which is very valid, is that it's quite possible that Democrats are going to end up losing some of these governor's races where they got an extremist Republican, helped get an extremist Republican through the primary, and then they'll have to deal with the consequences of somebody like that actually being in office. The other thing she asked about was gerrymandering. One reason that I'm still pretty confident that Republicans are going to get control of the House is just simply that the way that district lines were drawn across the country this year sort of structurally gave Republicans a big advantage for House seats. For instance, in Tennessee, there were 2 Democratic members of Congress. One of them was a Tar Heel graduate, Jim Cooper, who's represented Nashville in the U.S. House as a Democrat for decades. Republicans have total control in Tennessee, and they just got rid of his district. So now there's only going to be 1 Democrat from Tennessee in Congress instead of 2, just because of the district lines. They made it so that you can only get a Democrat in from Memphis, and they basically split Nashville into 6 different congressional districts so that they could get enough Republicans into all of them that Democrats would have no chance. And then another good example of that is Texas. Texas has actually gotten quite a bit more politically competitive over the last decade. I think John McCain won it by 12 or 13 points in 2008. Trump only won it by 6 points in 2020. So you would think with that big shift over the years that Democrats would have a chance to pick up some House seats. And when Republicans drew the new district lines this year, they basically got rid of the competitive House seats. They just shorted up so that the Republicans could keep every seat that they already had pretty much definitely for the next decade. And not to absolve the Democrats from doing this kind of thing either. Democrats in the states where they have total power engaged in this kind of thing too. But one thing that's kind of different between the Republicans and the Democrats is that Democrats in a lot of states, when they've gotten power, have put in nonpartisan redistricting that's taken away their ability to draw the lines that well for themselves, whereas anywhere that Republicans are in power, they've kept the power for themselves. So I think that one criticism people have within the Democratic Party of Democrats a lot of the time is that Republicans get an advantage because they're just more willing to sort of be ruthless, and that plays out in the district lines. Yeah.
Could you tell yet how the FBI raid in Mar-a-Lago is going to play?
My guess is that it's not going to end up making a big difference one way or the other. I just think with the election still being 13 weeks away, I doubt that this is going to be a front of mind sort of thing. There's some speculation that it's going to get Republicans fired back more up, and that it may actually help Republicans because of that sort of thing. I don't know how that's going to play. And then the key thing about how it might sort of impact feelings about Trump is that nothing impacts feelings about Trump. I mean, no matter how great or bad anything Trump might do is, his numbers just stay exactly the same. So my guess is that it'll end up being a wash. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah, sure.
I have a question on the North Carolina race. With the Green Party back in, how is that going to shift the numbers? Or do you think it will?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great example of a lot of drama over a very small chance of it actually impacting the outcome. Democrats are trying to keep the Green Party off the ballot in North Carolina because they're worried that it'll play a spoiler role that ends up helping give the U.S. Senate race and maybe other key close races to the Republicans this fall. My guess is that the Green Party would get maybe 0.5% of the vote in North Carolina. So it's just a question of whether the Senate race is so close that 0.5% of the vote can actually push it one way or the other. If you forced me to make a prediction today, I'd say I think that the Republicans will end up winning the U.S. Senate race in North Carolina probably by 3 or 4 points, such that 0.5 point for the Green Party won't make a difference one way or the other. But if it ends up being that close of a race, it could end up being something that makes a difference. If I'd been up here on October 10th, 2000, I would have said, well, it's unlikely that Ralph Nader will get enough votes to shift the winner of the presidential race in Florida, and he did. So I don't think it'll make a difference here, but there's a sliver of a possibility. Yeah.
Question about methodology. Could you talk about what kinds of methodologies you're using, why we should have confidence in polling, especially after 2016, what it means to have more cell phones now and fewer landlines, and what you're doing to give us a greater confidence in polling?
Sure. So more and more polling is being done through a variety of methods within the same poll. It used to be a generation ago that for any poll that you did, you just called people's landlines and that was how you did the poll. But increasingly there are significant generational differences about how people like to be contacted and that sort of thing. So you see much more of a combination now of getting people on their landlines, getting people on their cell phones, getting people on the internet, calling people, texting people, that sort of thing. Most polls that you see will be a blend of some of those different methods rather than just one way of reaching people. The way that we do things ourselves is that if you have a landline, we still call your landline. If you don't have a landline, we text you. And we're getting about 2/3 of our interviews by text now and only about 1/3 still by landlines. But it's still important to call landlines. I'll tell you a race that happened this week that sort of exemplifies that. Ilhan Omar from Minneapolis is one of the more contentious members of Congress, a member of the squad who says a lot of stuff that's kind of controversial. And she had a primary challenge this week, and there was a internet-only poll that was done of her race that found that she was up by 37 points. And she actually only ended up winning by 2 points. And the reason is because people who you would get on landlines don't like her. But if you do a poll 100% online, you're just missing those people who have landlines who would have been strongly for the other guy and made the polling a lot more accurate. So that's why we still do the landlines. I'll actually tell you a fun personal story related to this. In the lead up to the South Carolina primary in 2020, all these polls were coming out saying that Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders were basically tied. And these were mostly online polls that weren't getting people on landlines, that sort of thing. We knew that old people in South Carolina were strongly for Biden. So we actually ended up, I got so irritated by all these polls saying South Carolina was tied that I just had us do a poll on our own. Nobody even paid us to do it, but just sort of to set the record straight about what was going on in South Carolina. So we did a poll 6 days before the primary. We found Biden up by 15 when all the other polls were saying it was tied. And the next night they had their final debate in South Carolina. And one of the questions was to Biden was basically like, why are you doing so bad in the polls? And he said, well, the last poll had me up by 15. Like, he directly cited our poll. So that weekend, I actually happened to be in Columbia the night of his victory party. And there weren't that many people at his victory party, because that was at the point where he had lost Iowa, lost New Hampshire, lost Nevada. People sort of had left him for dead. So he did win by a significant margin, just like we had said he would. And he came around to me in the handshake line, and I was like, you know, Vice President Biden, I actually did that poll that you cited in the debate on Tuesday night that had you up by 15, and I said, I'm glad it was right. And he said, oh, am I really winning by that much? And I said, well, you're actually up by like 25 right now. And he had no idea. Like, I guess they had told him he won and sent him out there to give his speech. So earlier in the week, I got to tell him he was up by 15 theoretically, and then later in the week, I got to tell him for real what he was doing. So that was kind of fun. Yeah.
Tom, you said 3 months ago you were predicting something quite different. Today something. So when you come and talk to us in 2 months' time, what is likely or possibly going to change your mind?
I think, first of all, forces that we cannot see in the world yet. You know, it's sort of hard to predict what might change things because so much weird stuff has happened in recent months. I think the biggest question is whether the anger over the abortion decision perpetuates itself for another 3 months. You know, at this point, we're still only 7 weeks removed from it, and it does still have people really fired up. And we're seeing real-world implications of how people are fired up. I talked about that Kansas vote last week. There was a special election for Congress in Minnesota this week in a district that Trump won by 10 points in 2020. And the Democratic candidate only lost by 3 in the special election this week, even though it was a district that Trump lost by 10. So that's something where usually, if it's a district, that Trump won by 10. So that's something where usually if it's a district that Trump won by 10, you'd expect in the midterm for Republicans to be winning by like 15, 16, that sort of thing, only won by 3 this week. And I think that's, again, manifestation of sort of this different climate that we've seen since the Supreme Court made its decision. So that, to me, is the biggest question, is whether the outrage can be perpetuated. And there's sort of an interesting North Carolina example related to that, because we do have such short attention spans sort of as an American society these days compared to what they might have been. But I think in 2016, the HB2 controversy really did end up causing Pat McCrory to lose re-election as governor. And the reason was that it was the biggest story in the news in the state, like every day for 6 weeks. It's so often now in this country, the state, etc., that something happens on Tuesday and we've forgotten about it by Friday. So for an issue to really make a difference, it needs to have that sort of just like day after day being in the headline sort of thing. And I think that what we're seeing right now with abortion has the potential to be that, but we'll have to see if it holds. Rob.
Last question, Rob.
Tom, I'm intrigued by the comment you said that it's unprecedented that within the Democratic Party, Biden's numbers continue to fall, but the Senate candidates' numbers are rising. It's very interesting. So, again, not to wish ill will on Biden, but if Biden, say, died and Kamala Harris became president, would that flip it, or do you see someone within the Democratic Party, I guess is my question, who can step into the void that apparently Biden, represents? Who can be that person to kind of flip that script?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I mean, there's all this debate about whether Biden should run for re-election or not, and there's a lot of division within the Democratic Party about whether Biden should run for re-election or not. But then when you ask people, well, if not Biden, then who? There's no real consensus about that. There'd certainly be a strong constituency for Kamala Harris, but the Bernie wing of the party, I think, would want another crack at it, either with Bernie himself or to give Elizabeth Warren another chance. And then I think there's a certain group of sort of, we need to try something totally different that might move more towards thinking, well, maybe we should make Pete Buttigieg the face of the party, that sort of thing. So I really have no idea what would happen if something happened to Biden. I think it would certainly initially be chaos, and we would see from there if Democrats could get it together or not.
Tom, thank you very much. Something that's not going to go well for the rest of the year. Y'all have a great weekend. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. Go Hams.